Call this meeting to order.
I didn't know that. They suggest you take it during the day, but.
She's
Calling to
calling the
order.
meeting
Oh,
She's calling the meeting to order.
sorry, thank you.
Approval of agenda. First order of business is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion to approve the agenda? Seeing no discussion, then all in favor of adopting the agenda?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Approval of minutes, does not look as if we have a quorum. Public invitation, 5 minutes, from 6:05 to 6:10. Now we have time for members of the public to address the committee. Is there anyone who wishes to speak? So we don't have any members of the public here with us at this time. Reports from subcommittees, 5 minutes from 6:10 to 6:15. The subcommittees have not been meeting. Those are transportation, operations, and affordable housing. They have not been meeting at this time. Agenda. Met Council proposed Federal Transit Authority, FTA, and Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, Triennial Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, DBE goals for fiscal years 2024 to 2026 from 6:15 to 7:30. Dr. Samuel L. Myers, Jr., Director, Roy Wilkins Center for Human Relations and Social Justice, Hubert H. Humphrey School of Public Affairs.
So thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I'm very delighted here to talk a little bit about the work the Ward Wilkins Center at the University of Minnesota has done in collaboration with the Office of Civil Rights and Equality
Equity and Equal Opportunity.
to comply with the federal regulations for any recipient of $250,000 or more of FTA dollars, by the way, FHWA and FAA dollars, the requirement to set goal. And it's not a quota, and it is not a form of retribution against other groups. Rather, it's a goal designed to level the playing field for disadvantaged business enterprises. It's very important to place these goals in the context of the recent Supreme Court decision, students of fair admissions versus Harvard University, University of North Carolina, where the Supreme Court in a majority decision struck down the race-conscious programs of admissions at Harvard and University of North Carolina. Turns out that there is no federal mandate for Harvard to have a race-conscious program. There is a federal mandate for Metropolitan Council to have a race-conscious program and its expenditures of its FTA dollars. And so this is not Megan deciding that she wants to have a goal. Rather, this is a mandate that's been established for many years, and there's not been a retrenchment to that mandate. And so this is one of the few instances where Congress specifically indicated the expectation that federal funds would be spent in such a way that there would be a level playing field. And ironically, it was actually the Republicans who established the expectation during the Nixon administration that there be minority business enterprises, because the Republicans believe that business helps to strengthen the economy. And so my goal today is to summarize the report that we have spent the past, I guess,
9-10 months probably, between data pulling and analysis and.
9 to 10 months. And I have to thank the staff, of the Metropolitan Council for assisting us in wading through the data and being able to make a very precise estimate of the DBA goals for fiscal year 2024 to 2026. I'm going to do this separately for FTA and EPA, even though the methodology is essentially the same. But the answer to the question is different between FTA and EPA, and I do want to provide enough time for questions and answers for you if you have some sense of what's behind these estimates. So let me begin by talking about the methodologies, then I'll get the results of FTA, then the results for EPA, and I guess I should answer the question of why is it different from what it would have been if we would have produced these estimates in-house. So we've replicated the methodology that Metropolitan Council used previously, a methodology that I'll try to explain is actually in the paperwork and the guidance that the U.S. Department of Transportation provided, but I think it's not good guidance. And so there's a little footnote in the guidance. And the footnote in the guidance is that none of this guidance has the force of law. Okay. So I'm an economist and I do research and I've testified in litigation and third circuit court affairs, 8th circuit court affairs, and I'm happy to report that the methodology that we're describing is one that is withstood the scrutiny of people who would like to dismantle, programs like the program that's you're ready at the Metropolitan Council. So let me start with the methodology. So the first thing one must define is the geographic market area. In other words, where do you spend 75% or more of your dollar? And the World Wilkins Center doesn't actually believe that there's one unique geographic market area. We believe that there's actually a global market area, and there are different ways to count. So some people say, well, the Metropolitan Council is just the 7-county area. Well, it turns out that some of the work that you do engages business enterprises that are not in the 7-county area. And I should quickly point out that for the Environmental Protection Agency, if you have subcontractors from reservations, from American Indian businesses that open Bemidji is not in the 7-county area. But guess what? You have businesses in Bemidji that are indigenous businesses that are willing, able, qualified to bid. And so the first step is to define the geographic market area, not in the sense of just what is your identity as an organization, which might be the 7-county areas, but rather what's the business that you're doing. And we've calculated this over the past 6 years. The second step is once you have identified what the geographic market area is to identify what you plan to spend your money on in the next 3 years. And that's an estimate. And it's based on the contracts that the engineers and others have explained, the projects that you've expected to engage in. Now, if something changes between the time that the work has been done and and the time you begin to spend money, then I think that you need to talk to Megan about what to do about that. But I should say that there's something extremely unique about your forecasts. And that is the decision to allocate 61% of the dollars in the next 3 years. And one 6-digit NAICE code. A NAICE code is North American Industrial Classification. It's not NAICE code, somebody over Washington created those NAICE codes. They have to update it every year because of the fact that the businesses that people do aren't always neatly matched with the NAICE code. But this particular NAICE code is 485113. And that's the reason why I memorized that number, is that I have been worrying about 485113 for the past 3 months. So 485113 is transit operations. And my understanding is it includes a lot of things. It does not include purchase of vehicles. It does not include purchase of trains or of tracks. It does not include but it does include maintenance, it does include scheduling, it does include hiring of drivers and so forth, right?
Yeah, much of it, I can kind of clarify that, much of it is our Metro Mobility services. So when we put those out for bid, we have somebody, we bring on somebody that will handle that service, do all of the scheduling, and within their bid, they have all of the different factors that would come into that, such as those maintenance factors, wages for drivers, things along those lines. And I think Dr. Myers will discuss it a bit further. However, we don't have any Minnesota DDE firms that are certified with that NAICS code and that perform that work. We did find through Dr. Myers' analysis that we do have 3 that have done our interstate certification program, but they are from other states. So really getting them, and they have not historically bid on our projects for that. So really, there's been a lot of discussion talking about how we can further engage those firms, as well as do some outreach to other firms in other states that are certified in that code that could potentially then go through that interstate. Because right now, it's kind of a perfect storm of things for this. These are contracts that are master contracts, typically spread out over 5 years. And we have a large number of those master contracts that are expiring and then set to be re-advertised within this 3-year forecast. In addition, historically, a lot of the times these have been done through local funds, and now they are applying federal funds. So in previous goal settings, this NAICS code wasn't always in factor because we weren't utilizing federal funds. So there's just a lot of unique factors that kind of played into it and kind of culminated in this perfect storm of this code coming to fruition for this forecasted period.
So I want to talk about the topical issue very briefly. So Megan might mention much more about it. There is no 6-digit NAICS code for disabled handicapped transportation systems. And so this is kind of one of the dilemmas that you face when you're doing an analysis of the forecast of future expenditures. The NAICS codes doesn't necessarily match perfectly with the activities. So I'm going to explain later on how we have attempted to resolve and remedy the problem that one NAICS code accounts for 61% of your official expenditures. Where there are virtually no women minority-owned business enterprises. And so you be careful about believing everything comes out of the computer. And so what we want to do is we want to go back and we want to talk with the industry organization that helps businesses find their NAICS code. It's called NAICE. I think it's NAICE Association. And consult with experts who help businesses get loans and engage in things. It turns out there's some other numbers besides 485113, and those other numbers happen to have willing, able, qualified business enterprises from women minority communities across the state of Minnesota. And there are actually a lot around the country. And there's nothing in the federal law, there's nothing in state law that requires that you contract only with businesses in Minnesota. And so that's, I'm going to explain the methodology we've used. But instead of just picking one number, what we'll do is that we will we've reported all the different calculations, and we average across those calculations, and this is the basis for our base goal. And then there's an adjustment to the base goal, and the adjustment to the base goal is based on the assumption that if all firms were treated the same, if there were no differences in the previous contract awards and amounts of contract awards, then you don't need to do any adjustment. But if there's a disparity, and the disparity can't be explained by things like credit, size, tenure, type of business, location, then that unexplained gap, Councilwoman McCall knows I've talked about this thing, unexplained gap. There's a word that sometimes becomes used to describe an unexplained gap. It's sometimes called discrimination. That the unexplained gap can be used as a measure to adjust the base goal. Now, once you have the adjusted base goal, there's still one more step. And that step is to maximize the share of the goal that can be achieved through race-neutral means. Meaning that although you have a goal, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to use, that you're permitted to use race-conscious means in order to achieve the goal. And so this is kind of what separates the goal setting for FTA and EPA from the Supreme Court decision. And so if Harvard University had said, we've got both a race-neutral admission program and a race-conscious program, and our program is designed to maximize the race-neutral program, they would have won. But Harvard didn't say that. So in a way, even though I'm an economist, I'm also concerned about limiting the exposure that Metropolitan Council has to litigation. And the type of litigation you're likely to face is the type where people question whether or not the goals are too big. And they also question whether the goals discriminate. And they question whether or not the goals have been influenced by political considerations as opposed to by science, by technical analysis. And so I'm willing to testify that nobody has influenced me. Nobody has been calling me up at night, urging me to change the numbers. So the numbers are the numbers. And so the World Wilkins Center is willing to stand by these numbers because we believe that they represent the best estimate of both the base availability rate and the adjusted rates that maximize the race neutral portion. Now, a very short comment about race neutrality. It really does make sense to have race neutral programs in the political environment we're in right now. And illegal to have a set-aside, I think. I think it's illegal. What's not illegal is to have outreach programs. What's not illegal is to have mentor-mentee programs. What's not illegal is to help potential women minority-owned business enterprises learn about business opportunities. And so, as an example, if there's going to be a multi-million-dollar metro mobility contract, people need to find out about it. In other words, not passively, but some sort of explicit effort in order to encourage people. You can't make people bid on these contracts, but to give them some sense of the date, the time. You can even give them some cost estimates that come from the engineers department. The idea being that people don't know about the bidding opportunities, if people don't have experience doing the bidding opportunities, if people don't have an understanding of how to submit a credible bid, then of course they won't be successful. But guess what? It is legal for you to provide outreach, provide mentorship, to bring prime contractors and subcontractors together, to have a public announcement and so forth. So that's race neutral in the sense that it doesn't mean the goal is met by picking a person a winner. That's simply because of the color of their skin or the gender. Rather, it's expanding the pool. Okay, I may be wrong. I mean, it's possible. I wouldn't be surprised if everything I'm saying right now changes at some point in the future, where somebody says, no, you can't have the pipeline program. No, you can't have the outreach program. And guess what? If you can't have the outreach program, if you can't have the pipeline program, then you better try really, really hard in order to get the goals right. In other words, to be able to identify what fraction of women minority-owned business enterprises can get the contracts without having the goal, which seems like a reasonable objective. In fact, we probably should want, at some point in the future, 25 years from now, not to have to have, these interventions under the belief that successful firms become successful and they continue to be able to do well without, having programs like this disadvantaged business enterprise. So with that preface, let me talk about the methodology. The bottom line is 13.4% for the FTA contract. So I'm starting at the bottom line first, and then I'm going to walk you through the first steps. Okay, so the first step is the base goal. And the base goal is a weighted average of availability rates using 5 legally and economically valid methods. So one method is using a bidders list. One method, and so what you do is that you get all the bidders on your contracts, and that's your numerator. I'm sorry, that's your denominator. And then all the bidders who are certified DBEs, that's your numerator. And so that number is actually an extremely robust measure of availability. There's a downside of that method. It privileges bidders. Not everybody is a bidder because Metropolitan Council doesn't have bidding on subcontracts. It has bidding on prime contracts. And so this measure happens to have a bias in the sense of it bias in favor of people who are going to bid on the whole contract as a prime. And it turns out, somewhat ironically, if you're so good that you can bid as a prime, you might not qualify anymore as a disadvantaged business enterprise because there are 2 limitations on, or 2 standards for defining a disadvantaged business enterprise. One is an economic, standard, and that's based on your net worth and your revenues for the past 3 years. And the other is the standard of social disadvantage. And so there's something that's presumptively a social disadvantage, and that's a woman minority-owned firms. And then there's something that, is rebuttably a disadvantage, and that is whether you live in a rural area or an area where there's very little access to resources and so forth. So I should be very clear that the definition of a disadvantaged business enterprise, in other words, somebody who can meet those 2 standards, is not exclusively women and minority-owned firms. It can include, let's say, someone from a veteran who's disabled. It can include, a white firm that has his business in a area where it's difficult to get loans. So I want to be very clear that somewhat ironically, we're talking about the disadvantaged business program as if it's a race-conscious program, but the definition is not all race. Okay, but there's a distinction here between how economists think and how attorneys think. And so the attorneys say, if there's an ounce of race in it, then it's race. Okay, so that harkens back to the days where if you have an ounce of black blood, that means you're black. And so the Supreme Court did, address this issue in 1896 in the Plessy versus Jersey case, and it concluded, number one, yes, it's true that if the state says you're black, then you're black. And the second, is that these kinds of things like an ounce of race, is constitutional. And so you go to Brazil, and people shake their heads and say, what are you guys talking about? I mean, our definition of race is very different from other people's definition. So, but that's the bidders list tends to focus on the numerator of certified disadvantaged business enterprise, and the denominator, total number of business. And so we calculate this for the original value of the NAICS code of 485.113, and that's 8% base. And then if you use a proxy for 485.113, which includes four other areas, four other NAICS codes that are similar, and so it's not taxis, but it is commercial drivers providing services. So it's not tour drivers. So we spent hours and hours trying to sift through what is the qualification of a firm that could bid on one of these contracts that is 485.113. And so I say the proxy, but it turns out that the proxy also includes 485.113. So instead of just having 485.113, we have an umbrella that includes substitutes, similar things that are reasonable, that based on the industry, standard. Then the third, method is let's use the national method, because it turns out that a number of companies that provide this type of transit service have their offices in Michigan, Ohio, and I forget what the other one is, but
New York, I think.
and they open up branch offices. And so do you really have to be in the 21st century? Do you really have to have your headquarters? Do you have to have your headquarters in Minnesota in order to be able to run the business in Minnesota? And the answer is no. I mean, even if the law said that you had to have an office in Minnesota, you can still have an office in Minnesota. You just open up an office. And so we looked at the national average. So I did speak with the staff, and I suggested that they advertise, the people in Atlanta and people in people in California, the people who have experience doing this. I lived for a year in New York, and I can tell you that mobility here is much better than it is in New York. But the one in New York is actually run by the city as opposed to by, maybe the reason why it's so bad. It's what I should be saying that. But it turns out that there are a lot of companies around the country that have the business of running transit systems. Okay, and I got the list of them, and I can't remember, it was 187 of them, and I give you the name, the address, the telephone number, the website, and the DUNS number, and so you can send them an email next time you have a bid. Okay, so the third column is focusing on the use of the national average. So for the bidders list, it's 8%, 13.5%. Okay, but because the reason why it's much larger using the national average is the fact that the national average is much larger than the average within Minnesota. I should say that these numbers I'm talking about are average across 4 different geographic market areas. Okay, the table got too big to show all of them. So this is average. Okay, the second method is the vendors list method. So you have active vendors. And some of them are certified DBEs and some of them are not certified DBEs. The denominator is the total number of vendors. I excluded any vendor that's out of business. I excluded vendors that I couldn't match with Dun & Bradstreet because I need to know what their NAICS code is. I excluded that vendors that didn't respond, see, it turns out that you've got a lot of vendors, but some of those vendors, how do I say it? I don't know what happened, after the pandemic. And so we decided not to include the inactive vendors, but only include the active vendors. And among the active vendors, only ones that I could match with Dun & Bradstreet. I admit that that's kind of a weak, strategy. But I need to know what the NAICS code is because the second step is to calculate what the forecast expenditures are. So knowing that a firm exists isn't good enough. I need to know what that firm's business activity is. And so that's 6%, 11.5%. And then I use the gold standard for the census. It used to be called the Survey of Business Owners. Now it's called the American Business Survey. The American Business Survey has 6-digit codes. It actually checks to see what your revenues are, what the size of your firm happens to be. And so what we did was we went to the federal guidelines for being a small business. Okay, let me explain. In order to be a disadvantaged business enterprise, you have to be a small business. And so we went to the census definition of small business. The census definition of small business varies with respect to the type of business. So every business has a standard. Some businesses like, I have revenues of a couple $1 million a year, and some have revenues like construction of like $17 million a year. So there's a variation, and so there was matched what the revenues, what the employment was from the definition of a small business. Okay, the American Business Survey doesn't indicate whether or not a firm is a disadvantaged business enterprise. It indicates whether or not the firm is a woman-owned, meaning 51% or more, owned by women, or minority-owned. And so we have a number of women, we have a number of minority, but we don't want to double count, so we take the sum of the women plus the minority minus the women minority. Okay, so this is the method for using the American Business Survey. But because of confidentiality, we were only able to calculate that for the whole state. Because the moment you get to smaller, geographic areas, we can't compute that, for all the different methods. So the American Business Survey method, has 15%, 15%, 15%. Then the next method is the DBE method. Okay, so the DBE method comes from the state's certified DBE list. And I can't remember how many firms it was. Firstly, no, either one, or I can't remember how many. There virtually no certified DBEs on the Minnesota DBE list, the list that we're using to define what a DBE is, and the business list and the vendors list. And so yes, you have a dilemma. The dilemma is there aren't any DBEs. Here, you see, this is certified in Minnesota. It's not whether or not there are no DBEs in Ohio. It's in this area. It's not whether or not there are no DBEs in Michigan or in Atlanta. It's that they're none in Minnesota.
Is that because they're targeted business groups?
But who's gonna fill out the forms if they don't think that they're gonna be able to bid on the contract? So it's I've had people complain to me about how difficult it is. So I'm at the University of Minnesota. I try my hardest to use certified women minority-owned firms when I do work, research, subcontracting. And so I meet people who are qualified and I tell them, are you certified? And they say, no, because I spent so much work in order to get certified. So to make the long story short, this number of 3.8% is calculated using this 485.113 next code, and that's what kind of rang bells to us, because it says, wait a minute, what about people who operate vans? What about people who operate county to city bus lines? What about people who operate rural bus lines? Rural bus lines is not included in 485.113. And so the question is, should we expand this? So suppose that up in Bemidji, suppose that in Red Lake, there's a company that provides transit services, and they are listed as rural transit. We're missing them. Okay, so we used the proxy, and we came out with the 15.1%. So the number is really different depending on whether or not you use 485.113 or as opposed to using proxy. Or then you can use the national estimate, and the number is 9.3%. Then the next method is called the Dun and Bradstreet method. So the Dun and Bradstreet method is the method that many jurisdictions use, because it's listed in the battery. So let me tell you that the first, second, and third, and the fourth methods, the numerator and denominator come from the same place. The fifth method, the numerator is coming from the Dun and Bradstreet. No, I'm wrong. Okay. I'm sorry. It's the DBE list. The numerator and denominator come from different places. Okay, so the numerator is the DBE list, so the denominator is whatever your denominator is. And some people have a denominator of something called the county business pattern data. And some people use the zip code business pattern data. And that's a huge, huge data set. There's a whole bunch of numbers. And so that's another reason why you tend to get lower numbers for the count. But then the Dun and Bradstreet method, the numerator and denominator are the same, but you have to have a Duns number in order to be in Dun and Bradstreet. And so, by a show of hands, how many of you have Duns numbers? Okay.
Pretty good.
Surprise.
Yeah.
Okay. Not everybody has a Dun number. And so, and by the way, I do think that the next time you meet with your potential bidders, tell them to get Dun numbers. It's not that hard, I'm not sure. Did you have to pay for it? Or was
No,
it
you just call.
Just call.
It's easier to call than to wait for an email.
Is it Duns? D-U-N?
Yes.
Huh.
So Duns is good because Duns does credit rating. And Duns, if you want to get a loan from a bank, they want to know, what's your credit rating.
And for grants
So
too.
unlike
If you like
credit
grants
rating
and all of that,
for-
you need that number.
consumer credit,
And
I
federal
use it for
certification.
people complain
Oh, yeah. A nonprofit.
to write the
Yeah.
direct letters.
so the Dun and Bradstreet method is a lower number, but I can explain why. It's because it's kind of restricted to people who have Duns numbers. And bigger firms tend to have Duns numbers, even though it still has the advantage, I think. I was mixing the Dun and Bradstreat method and the DBE method. So the Dun and Bradstreet method doesn't tell you whether or not it is a woman, whether or not it's certified DBE. It tells you whether it's woman or minority. And that's the data set where we match with the size of the revenue standards. So there are 5 different methods, 3 different ways of calculating the 485.113, and so we average across those 5 methods, and we came up with 9.6. Okay, and so I'm very sensitive to the fact that 9.6 is influenced in a non-trivial way by that 3.8. But rather than just take it out, I put everything in. Moreover, I'm not too enthused about picking and choosing among these numbers. You know, if you pick the number of 15.2, you know, that's the highest estimate. Then people will say, well, wait a minute, the 15.2 is based on the whole state of Minnesota, not for the 7 counties. Or I guess you could say, you know, let's only use the category that uses national estimates. See, if you pick and choose among these different methods, then there's bias that's into it. And so what we did, that we found the average, but I should be fair in saying the average is a weighted average in the sense that it's weighted by the share of dollars that is spent in these different component areas. So with that said, that's the base, the 9.6. Next slide, we adjusted that base, and we adjusted not by one, but by 4 different estimates of the unexplained residual, or sometimes called discrimination. And that varies depending on whether or not you include small contracts. Okay, so this is very interesting. That small contracts frequently are not bid. And so that's the competition. There's no competition for the small contracts. So many jurisdictions say, let's only focus on those that are not small contracts. And you know that the unexplained gap is bigger when you focus on the bigger contracts than when you include the small contracts. So that's one methodology. And the second methodology is to use 2 different advanced econometric techniques. And I'm going to tell you what the words are, but that's not important. One is called a Blanda Oaxaca decomposition. And the second is called a Gelbach decomposition. There are 2 different methods. In the appendix, we talk about the strengths and weaknesses of those 2 methods. And then we average across those. And so the average adjustment is 39.9%. Therefore, the next, the base is 9.6%. The adjustment is 39.9%. So you multiply 9.6% times 1.399, and that gives you 13.4%. Okay, so that's where the 13.4% is. We've got the 9.6%, and then you increase the 9.6% by the percent that is unexplained, and so that's 1.399. Then the next step is to find out what portion of the gap maximizes, what goal will maximize the race neutral portion. And the answer is that about 18.2% of the goal can be race neutral. And then 81.8% is race conscious. And so the race conscious goal is 11%, and the race neutral goal is 2.4%, and so 2.4 plus 11 is 13.4%.
Can I ask you a question? I think I just got lost. How did you know what the race neutral portion was?
I didn't include that in the presentation. Okay, so what we did was that we looked at all the contracts and all the subcontracts over the past 6 years. And we estimated the total amount of contract dollars, and as well as the log of the contract dollars, as a function of the size, tenure, credit rating, industry, and whether or not they're the goal. And we estimate that separately for all contracts and just for DBE contracts. And you might say, but of course, if there's a goal, there'll be a higher amount of dollars to DBEs. But then at the same time, if there's not a goal, there's some number of dollars that went to DBEs, because it turns out that there were a number of contracts that did not have goals on it that DBEs competed for and won. either as primes or subs. And so the idea is, what's the maximum? What value of the race conscious goal, what value, I should say, what value the race neutral goal maximizes the share of dollars that go to DBEs without a goal? And the answer is not zero. Okay, so some people think that you have to have a goal in order for DBEs to win a contract. And the answer is that's not true. It's absolutely true that some DBEs were getting dollars without a goal. And so I left that out because it's a whole bunch of questions. But to answer your question is that the methodology is designed to produce an empirically valid estimate of the amount of dollars, what the portion of the goal that would maximize the share of the dollars going to DBEs without a goal. Okay. I'm sorry I left that out. Okay, so this is the FTA. Okay, the next is the EPA. Now let me say that EPA isn't governed by the U.S. Department of Transportation. And so you have an advisory that you receive from EPA that permits you to have a disadvantaged business program, but doesn't tell you how to do it. And so what we've chosen to do is to use the FTA, FHA, we've used the same methodology to produce the goal. Now it turns out, even though we're using the same methodology, we're using different data. Okay, so that's the 11.9% is the EPA guide. And it's using 3 availability methods. And I'll tell you why it's 3 and not 5. The bidders list, you only have one bidder on the bidders list. Well, there was only one contract to a DBA, and that was $500,000. And that $500,000 to one DBA accounted for something like 1/3 of 1% of the total expenditures. And so the problem is that I'm trying to estimate a model, and there's only one observation. I mean, there's no amount of magic that's going to make the computer. When you're doing statistical analysis, you have to have some power. Okay. And so using the bidders list and using vendors list, I wasn't able to get any meaningful results. So we just focus on the DBE method, the Dun & Bradstreet method, and the American Business Survey method. And so its base goal was 9.9%. And then the adjustment to the base goal was 19.9%, which is somewhat interesting because this adjustment is smaller for EPA. I think you need to talk to the staff to understand a little better the difference between your ability to get women and minority-owned business enterprises doing work for EPA as opposed to those doing work on FTA. Because EPA does include some work related to environmental impact statements. It does some work related to looking at cultural, the things that you just can't dig up the ground without first making sure that it's not sacred ground and so forth. So I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but it turns out they're professionals who are whipping it out of their firms to do this for a living. And these are not multi-billion-dollar contracts. These are relatively compact things. And so on one hand, it's a good thing that EPA has a marketplace where there are people who are willing and able to do the work. On the other hand, it's unfortunate that the data I had didn't permit me to estimate using the vendors list or the bidders list a credible number for this is just very small numbers. And it's frequently the case for those who remember your statistics class when you were college. They said as soon as the numbers get to be small, then you should stop and focus on things that are more credible. So the discriminatory gap is relatively small. The base goal is about about similar to the base goal for FTA. And then the race neutral portion is actually almost half of the adjusted goal. So it's not much discrimination, so you go from 9.9% to 11.9%, because that's about a 20% increase. But then the race neutral portion is 6.5%, which is actually much larger than the race neutral portion from the FTA. And what's the logic here? The logic is you really do have the ability to get women minority-owned firms into environmental protection agency type contracts without a goal. Okay, but meaning that you still have a goal, but the portion of the goal that's achieved without the goal, is about half, or a little more than half of the total. Yes.
Was there more variety in NAICS codes for EPA contracts than there was for FTA contracts?
They're pretty even distribution across the NAICS codes, so it means that there wasn't any one NAICS code that had more than something like I don't remember having an NAICS code that was more than 20% or 15%. When you say one NAICS code, that's 60%. In my entire life, all the years I've been doing the first DB goals I did was for New Jersey Transit in 1992. And all the years that I've been doing this, I've never seen one NAICS code that was 66%. One 6-digit NAICS code. And so that's one reason why we spent 10 months trying to solve the problem. So with that said, I'm going to stop and let me compare what the results would have been, had you done it in-house. And so the methodology that you use in-house is one that uses the DBE list method. And for the 7 counties, and you would have had a base goal of 4.8% for FTA. And you would have had a base goal 13.9% for EPA. And depending on how you did the adjustment, so the adjustment is something that's strange. I'm gonna describe it to you. So the adjustment that we've been using is the adjustment for discrimination. And so if there's discrimination, the goal is adjusted up. If there's no discrimination, then the goal is not adjusted. But the advisory says, look at the past, and then look at the base goal. If in the past you have been doing very well, lower the goal. If in the past you haven't been doing well, raise the goal. And so basically the adjustment is you take the median for the past 3 years, 6 years, and you add that to the base goal, and you divide that by 2. I'm telling you that if the median is bigger than what the base goal is, you're going to end up pulling that goal down. If the median is smaller than what you've been doing, then you're going to do the median, you're going to push that goal up. And I'm thinking, what's the logic there? And the logic, the fact, I'm surprised nobody sued, the U.S. Department of Transportation of using that kind of methodology. The logic is we don't want to deviate too far from what we've done in the past. And I said, wait a minute, we just had a pandemic. We've had a whole bunch of firms that went out of business. We've got a lot of new people who lost their jobs and then started business. So we had 2 diametrically opposed things that went on. One is some business went out of business. And then 2, some employees, professionals. Okay. So what do professionals do? Professionals folks who are unemployed, they start a business. And so it turns out that you don't know for sure whether or not the new environment is an environment that should be, mapping the previous trends. So my conclusion is that had you estimated what the the DBE goals should have been using the methodology that's in the advisory, but the footnote in the advisory said that this advisory does not have the force of law. Then your goal would have been either 9.1% or 9.3% for FTA, and it would have been 12.14% or 15.31%, depending on whether or not you use 3 years or 5 years of previous. So let me start and answer your questions.
I think we can also, I just also want to point out that, as Dr. Myers alluded to, we are required by federal regulation to establish these goals every 3 years. He did reference, however, in 2019, the EPA did away with the requirement to do these goals. But as a council and as an office, we wanted to still go through the process for the EPA because we do want to have that as our benchmark when we're focusing on how we're establishing our project-specific goals and things along those lines. So we do administer that program, as he mentioned, under those FTA requirements with regard to that. And then we are also, and you should have all received an email when we started our public comment period, but we are required to have a 30-day public comment period in regards to the proposed FTA goal. And so we're in the middle of that right now, and that ends on September 28th. So if you have, comments or thoughts or anything like that regarding the proposed goals, the methodology, please submit those. My email was in, I believe, the initial email. So please submit those to us. We really do want that feedback. Part of the regulation, it shouldn't be just a pro forma request for those comments. We really do want to take those comments to heart and then look at where those comments come in, and we submit all of that to Dr. Myers and his team then to come up with our final decisions that we will then bring back to the council and management committee for final approval in October. And then we submit those.
Thank you. This is all very, very mystical to me. Even though it's also mathematical as you show it, there is some subjectivity in the manner in which the decisions about whether to average or take one factor or another are made. I appreciate that. It makes sense. The decisions that were made in this methodology do make sense. It is also interesting to see that even through pandemic, in terms of utilization, okay, there it is, we were able to, in the FTA, as well as in the EPA, increase the utilization of DBEs. It makes me wonder too, what the goals look like in those years and how we did against those goals. Did I see that here and did we use that as a factor?
Yep, so when we submitted the data, we did submit the 6 previous years of achievement with regards to EPA projects and also the federally funded FTA projects. And there should have been, I believe it's on the table, there's question, like a FAQ for EPA goal and a FAQ. So we did provide you what the previous 3-year goal was and then what we've achieved throughout those 3 years. And then as you spoke about, I'm not sure if you were saying the overall goal, but the overall goal is, again, on all the forecasted projects. What we're required to do by regulation is then we do have to submit, when we do our individual project goal setting, so, as a committee member, as things go before you to the various committees, you've seen where we've had goals on projects and how those are being met. So it's very rare that those goals are ever gonna match exactly what that 3-year, correct. Because there's gonna be times where it has to be smaller due to the availability, and then there's gonna be times where there are a lot of opportunities and we will exceed what that 3-year goal is. So we really then garner the achievement based on the overall average of those individual reporting periods. So the goal, Triennial is our benchmark. That's what we have to report against when we submit our annual reports to the FTA. And we are always more than happy to exceed those goals. But we really want to make sure that we have that sound methodology that one allows, and we wanted, this year is the first time that we're doing this outside of the council. We've always done this internally. And as Dr. Myers has talked, and I think Ashanti has mentioned it, a couple of the other committees, being an internal, we don't have the staff or the resources to be able to do these various methodologies. We went to the regulations and found that simplest formula, how we can do, as he discussed, the median, which doesn't really make sense how the adjustment is, but that's how it was being done. So moving forward, we really wanted to have something that was very legally defensible. And I think we've had some questions, well, why is the EPA lower this time? And it's gonna change every 3 years because it really does look at what's forecasted. You know, projects that come up, for example, big projects like Southwest where we have a lot of participation. That year it may have been higher. The next 3-year goal will likely be higher because we'll have Purple Line, we'll have the Blue Line extension. So it really does focus on what are the projected projects and where the availability lies within that 3 years. So there will be a variation there among the different triennial goals.
I do see on this goal graph here for FTA that the 2021-23 goal was 14%.
Correct.
You did mention that there were 3 years or 6 years.
Yep, there should be right under where it says the goal, then it should show the achievement, I believe for
It
21.
shows achievement.
It shows what we achieved, so that what's under there is 2021 and 22, that's what we reported to FTA. And then we are only halfway through our reporting period for 2023. The fiscal year just ended on September 30th. So we will be bringing forth the overall achievement on that in November to the various committees and council.
All right. Feeble mind that I have. And you know, I just admit that this is not an area I've spent as much time in as I would like to have. But the assumption that I'm making as I look at achievement and as I look at the 2021-23 goal of 14% is that the goals over those 2017 to 2022 years were underneath those achievements. Is that true? The goals.
I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question.
Do we always achieve the goal?
I'm without looking at the sheet, I know we have, I think there was 1 year in that where we had a quarter, like a half, or I should say a semi-annual average where we did not achieve, but we did overall throughout the course of that fiscal year, we did meet that goal.
What table are you looking at?
It's a
yeah.
thank you.
EPA or FTA? There's two.
I'm looking at the FTA.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
just trying to track on how the goals may have changed
Right.
as I see what the achievement.
Yep, so as you can see for the FTA, so the goal was the 14 from the 2021 to the 2023, and then below that is the achievement. So in 2021, our overall achievement for that whole fiscal year was 14.02%, so we exceeded that goal. In 2022, our achievement was 18.22%.
Right.
And then 2023 is to be determined because we're still working on finalizing that. That won't be reported until November.
So I'm wondering, you know, where, although I see how the numbers play out here, you know, where the logic of lower goals
Okay.
sets
Yep.
in the mind of what we're trying to do, which
Right.
is continue to grow that spend.
Thank you for that question. I think what to focus on there is that the projects that were submitted as the forecasted 3 years for these 3 years were very different than what was submitted this year. In the past, like I said, this year we had a historic number of those master contracts for those metro mobility where we don't have availability. We have never seen where those are coming in at what they're being forecasted to be awarded this coming 3 years. That's okay.
Go ahead.
This coming 3 years. In addition, that specific NAICS code and those types of work historically in the past have been designated with local funds. Now they're looking at putting federal funding on that, so that's where that's pulling it down to. So I can see where it's confusing that if we're achieving and we're exceeding this, why is the goal lower? However, in order to be legally defensible, we really need to focus on what that forecast is for that specific 3-year period. And then look at those methodologies and come up with what, based on the availability and whatnot, makes sense for that 3-year fiscal year.
I'll hold the next question.
I was gonna say, I think that kind of pulls into my question was, so if you always exceed the goal every year, at that point, then you can use the average to
make the goals higher at that point, so your goal really is to have this like lower percentage, not that you want, like, say you have the 11%, but you hit 18, whatever that was. If you do that consecutively over 3 years, then you can say, well, now we can make our goal 18, or how would that work?
I think it would be hard to just use that, and I'll let, maybe Dr. Myers wants to think, but I would
Because of
say,
the mix
be
of
right, and because
business.
again, we're not comparing apples to apples, right? That forecast is still always gonna be different in the types of projects, if that makes sense. So if we look at those 3 years and say, you know, we achieved 13, 14, 18, what's the average of those?
Yeah.
Why isn't that our next goal?
Yeah.
Because what was awarded during that time to get that achievement may not be that same forecasted type of work that's on the next 3 years.
I see, okay.
If that makes sense. So for example, like within here, I think one of the years that we had the highest, like the gold line civil construction was awarded, which really brought up that 2022. This coming forecasted period, due to, you know, purple line being pushed back, we don't have any of those large types of projects planned and forecasted to be awarded in this current fiscal year that we're proposing. So that really brought down where a lot of the availability for some of the small businesses would be.
So one more question. Can I just ask this real quick?
No.
The NACE code thing, too. It is astonishing to see so much in that one category, in that one NACE code, 66%. I think is what you said of the spend. In terms of the methodology that's being advanced now, it blends what we found in that one NACE code, and then it broadens that to other NACE codes as well. Do we anticipate in the future that we would continue to use that kind of methodology that is blending those narrow and broader NACE code representations? Or would you be recommending that we modify our approach over the next years and use the broader category only? It does appear as though the first NACE code, narrow NACE code, brings in a smaller percent than does that broader code, and would continue to hold us in that way.
So my advice to the staff is, in the future iterations, use the NACE codes that the firms that are bidding on the specific projects list as their NACE codes. In other words, the NACE codes that is 485-113 is a NACE code that in words match what the project is. But they don't have a lot of firms that are previously bidding on this because we didn't have a lot of bidding for these activities. My advice to staff is to collate the NACE codes for the bidders. So you don't have to list one NACE code, you can have 5 NACE codes and list those as the substitute for this activity in the future. So you're not using just the dictionary or the advisory that's coming from the NACE association, but rather you're using your marketplace. And so the people who do this work,
Yeah.
those are the NACE codes. And so the next time, if you're bidding, if you're spending money in this area in the future, instead of using 485-113, use the NACE codes that the bidders are using. I want to respond to this issue about beating your goals. And I think what you're getting at is, if your goal is low, then you're going to beat your goal. Okay, I think that's what you're saying. The problem is that, technically speaking, if you beat your goal, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you're supposed to stop.
Yep, there's a certain time frame in the regulation that if you're consistently, that you could do away and then go to a specific, just race neutral program.
So that's where the race neutral portion comes in. Because you can stop, but you can continue to do your race neutral activities. And so it's kind of like an interesting tension between wanting to have a goal that you can't meet. Because if your goal is high, you'll never have to stop. As opposed to wanting to have some documentation that you're doing a good job. And the best way to show that you do a good job is to meet or beat your goal. And I'm staying out of this. I'm not involved. This is an internal discussion because the job of the staff is to monitor the contracts. The job of the staff is to work on the daily, interplay with the various bidders and so forth. I stand behind the estimation of goal, despite the fact that it's a little lower than it was in 2023. But it was different methodology, completely different methodology. In fact, if you use that methodology now, the goal would have dropped down from 14% to, I don't know,
4.58, I think it was.
or something. So I think these two conversations have to be separate. So, one, what is the goal that you can go to court with? If somebody sues you, you can defend. That's one topic, and I'm here to help. The second topic is, what do you do internally with the reality that the moment you exceed your goal, you're going to have to stop? And my sense is talk about it internally and come up with a plan to continue to use your race neutral portion of goal. When they say stop, it's stop in that year, because I think the next year, so you have a 3-year goal, but if you beat the goal in 1 year, that's just that goal, even though it's a 3-year goal, it turns out that every year you have to do a reassessment. And it's really something that people don't understand about meeting and beating your goal. We, the research team, never use the goal in our estimates, except in doing our comparison. We use the actual dollars spent. I'm sorry. We use the actual dollars awarded. And so there's the report that Mike and us do every quarter is on dollars spent. The analysis that we did was on dollars that were awarded. And so if there's an award for a 5-year contract, it shows up. Suppose there's an award for $19 million on October 1st. That $19 million shows up in my database for October 1st. In contrast, even though it's a 5-year, even though it's awarded on October 1st, it's not spent on October 1st. It kind of shows up every year as maybe some portion of it. So there's an important distinction between the analysis of your awards and the analysis of your spending. Why is it important for the goal setting to use the analysis of the awards? And the answer is, the award is the amount, that's the contract. The award's the amount that is the negotiation, even if it's a 5-year contract or if it's a 1-year award, that's the number that was awarded at a particular time. And so if we're talking about bidding, if we're talking about contracting, if we're talking about procurement, the award is the number that you want to use as opposed to the spending. So with that said, I think there are two separate topics here. One topic has to do with exceeding your goal in any quarter. It's a quarter.
Semi-annual for FTA.
I'm sorry.
Semi-annual.
Okay.
We report semi-annual.
Semi-annual. So she has a form she needs to fill out. And exceeding the goal, the regional director is going to look at her numbers, and as soon as she starts exceeding the goal, they're going to send you a letter telling you, you've got to stop. Okay. That's the topic of internal management, and that's why many agencies get worried when they have a big DBE contract that goes out, and that one contract is going to push you over this one. Okay. It doesn't make sense to me, and there's something about the rule that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You do a good job, And the moment you do a good job, you get better than us. Okay, I do think that there's a case to be made to go to Congress and to talk to people of the Department of Transportation that that rule has some perverse effects on people's, on recipients' behavior. But that's a different topic. The topic I'm focused on tonight is what's the goal? And you can't manipulate the goal. You can't say, let's change the goal in order to make it so high that we'll never meet it, because that is illegal. It's actually, I think there's some wording that you're not supposed to use, political considerations to determine what the goal is. So I feel very confident about the goals that we've established here. And you are correct that the goal for FTA is lower for the next 6 years, next 3 years than it was 3 years ago. By a half a percentage point.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Okay.
all right,
Actually, that comment.
okay. It seems to me that one aspect of setting the goal is looking at forward thinking, what contracts is MnDOT gonna let out, or the Met Council gonna let out in the next 3 years. But the analysis of how many DBEs there will be is either past or present thinking. It's static. One of the things I really appreciated in your description of the race neutral approaches is ideally those approaches would lead to a much higher number of ready, willing, and able firms that are capable of performing the services that the Met Council is gonna let out. And so it's maybe a comment, maybe a question, that I want the Met Council to be focused on the approaches that are not gonna just assume the existing contracting pool is available for projects, or even a slightly expanded contracting pool looking at adjacent NAICS codes, but instead is really thinking proactively about how do we let people know that in 3 years we're gonna be letting out construction contracts or transit dispatching contracts, so that businesses can start right now building the capabilities to offer those services and compete competitively for them.
I can speak to that a little bit. So over the last year, it started within our procurement department that they are now on our website. We have our forecasted projects, and I know it's updated quarterly, and I think it goes out to however far we're predicting that we have some of these projects. So that gives a rough idea of what's coming. It puts it in a bucket of, let's say, 500,000 to 2 million, 2 million to 10. So it puts it in those kinds of buckets so they can kind of see what's coming. That's also something when we know we have big projects coming, we do a lot of outreach. We can look to say, okay, we have these large groups of work coming. That's where our engagement and outreach unit can come in. We can host some of these meet and greets. These are projects that are coming. And that's also why OEO is so fixed on trying to get it early in and on that planning stage. That's where we really need to be. Like when you're thinking of where that money is going to be spent, we want to be part of that initial planning so we know these are coming 3 years from now. How can we not only look at our current DBE pool and help build those capacities and help them expand, the work scopes they can work in, but then how can we also look for other firms in the community that for whatever reason may do that work but aren't currently certified? How can we get them into that certification process so that when these opportunities do come up, we have a bigger pool of DBE firms? So we do have concerted efforts to really not only expand who's already in our directories with regards to their capacity and their work scopes, but then also find firms to always continue and build our DBE directory as well.
So I'm going to go back to a comment Dr. Myers made about DBE. Does not necessarily mean African American or Asian, or it's based on income. So that DBE pool could theoretically be all white and meet that income category. So I don't want, as an equity committee, as we look at this, we have to be race conscious in that. Because we know that these systems have always operated on the side of relational hiring processes. Who is known and who you have connections with inside of the system. And as I understand the law, you have high race conscious efforts in contracting is because you underutilize race groups in your bidding, your contracting opportunities for that year. So you can then go to a race conscious to try to level the playing field. What we have to get as an equity group is how do we achieve that on the front end? How do we make sure that we're getting diverse pools of businesses based on race, because that's, how we're living, to participate and be utilized. And I don't think it's enough to just do outreach or to send a notice out to people. I think there have to be a conscious effort to further equal opportunity where there is underutilization or no utilization at all by pointing public dollars in a contractor way to build that capacity within the community. There's no excuse that on the Metro Mobility that there isn't a local vendor that can't bid on that project. I would think as taxpayers that are investing in that system, that we would expect at a minimum that this entity is working with some entity to ensure that capacity exists within our own community to bid on that project, and a diverse group of people to build on it. And in fact, a diverse distribution of the opportunity within those communities. So while I understand the legally defensible document there, and it's great, when you look at it, this does keep somebody out there who wants to sue us. I never know who these people are, and I've never seen the suit come forward, but we always talk about, oh, we gotta protect ourselves from that proverbial suit that's coming down the pipeline. But I also look at that as, we don't wanna really share these dollars in an equitable kind of way by using that probability as a possibility, when it's probably not going to materialize as one inside want to think that that's the case. I guess the question would be, with all of this race conscious makeup you have to do, why aren't those race groups suing because you're underutilizing them? I mean, you clearly are maximizing white contractor utilization, but when you start to break out the race groups, we see a race conscious effort, underutilization. That would be your biggest fear, is why aren't they suing? Because you're underutilizing them. And one of the things we did in St. Paul, and I think Dr. Myers was a part of working with Bill Wilson on Administrative Code Chapter 84, the Vendor Outreach Program, which I think is an exciting ordinance that kind of get at things. We contracted, and I think the state is doing some of this now, with Neighborhood Development Center, African Development Center, and a number of other groups like that, Women Contractors Association, to actually start working with those population groups to build capacity and move them into bidding opportunities. I think the Met Council need a very conscious effort like that, where money is set aside, is contracting with nonprofits and saying, hey, we're forecasting out over the next 3 years, find us some entrepreneurs, find us some businesses that work in this general area, and let's see if we can get them bidding and competing for these dollars to stay and be utilized across all those communities. Because there's so many things that's kept us on. Dr. Myers mentioned that a lot of people, when I worked in the state and we were trying to get people to certify as DBEs and target business groups, they just gave up because there was no opportunities coming to them. And I'm sitting here looking at this data for MnDOT. And in 2022, they had 0% DBE utilization. And so when people see that, and that, you know, they're not using anybody at all, and, you know, even here in the Met Council, there's been gross underutilization of businesses of color. And that, when people do try to compete for those jobs, they end up losing out. And that's why we're going to a race conscious. But in the federal law, it does say that you have the right to develop capacity where there is no utilization. So if the Asian community doesn't have somebody that does what you're bidding, you can work purposefully within that community to build that capacity up. And I just don't see that kind of stuff happening. For me, that's the measure of a successful contract procurement program, is when you have that kind of pipeline and capacity building going on.
This is about the EPA. And initially, this summer, they've been working with the MPCA and doing community workshops or meetings at UROC this summer. And so initially it started as environmental justice issues, but it's grown. And so what they're telling us is that they've become more conscientiously racially aware. And so for me, it would be interesting to see in the next 3 years if they are true to their word in their efforts, because they've been getting, the last meeting was about transportation and the light rails and that access. But also then there was a period of time in that discussion of DBEs and getting contracted. And so they gave their card out to a lot of people and said, you know, connect with us, call me if you have any questions, and if you need help filling out those, you know, forms or applications. And so, like I said, it'll be interesting to see 3 years down the line what their goals have changed, and that they're really being honest and truthful to the community.
I think that's a good point. Excuse me. And I think looking ahead and looking at our past, so the DBE program, one of the downfalls of that federal program is we don't have a lot of the leeway of purchasing powers to kind of designate where we can spend some of that money. If you're familiar with our local funded, our MCUP program, for example, we have, by state statute, we are allowed to do some direct spending with our local funded, you know, and we do have that where we give them, we can spend more with our MCUBs than we can just any vendor off the street. We can do our MCUB select, but the federal program doesn't allow for us to do a lot of that things, which is unfortunate. But I think you're absolutely correct in that it does allow for the capacity building, the supportive services, and those things. I'm not sure if you're aware or not, I believe you are, but our engagement and outreach unit does currently have an RFP out, and I'm not sure if it's closed or it's close to closing, but where we are bringing in a consultant to kind of do some of those capacity buildings and focus on, you know, some things that not only our small businesses say that they need to become more competitive, but also what our divisions are telling us that they need. For example, some additional safety training, bidding and estimating, how to work with our change orders, things along those lines. That's things that, especially our change order process, some of our small businesses, it's just confusing. The government paperwork is confusing compared to being on those private sectors. So we do have that. We've had some talks because MnDOT does have designated funding that they get to do those supportive services. The council does not have that right now coming in. So we are trying to figure out ways, is there a way that we can get some of that funding where it can be written in to say a percentage of this amount of federal funding can be used for those supportive services, or, you know, through the various grants that we were able to do the current RFP. So you're right that that is an area that we definitely need to build and expand on.
I think that there's a lot of new communities here that are acclimating themselves to this culture of operating, and that's important for them. I know one of the things we've done is build capacity with organizations that work with the entrepreneurial spirit in those communities. And this would be, having a consultant inside the Met Council, I don't know if that's gonna cut it, but contracting with African Development Solutions and say, we want you to work, or NDC, or, one of the Women Venture, or, any of those groups, and doing contracts where they actually are producing ready, willing, and able contractors to bid on that work. That's when you really start to nurture permanent capacity within the community. But to just have a consultant inside is just having the same people cycle through to work with that consultant. And I think you need to maximize as much human capital as possible to get our money spread more equitably through our communities. Because there are a lot of people investing in this that are not getting any return in their communities because of it. The only other thing that I say is I think the work here is great, Dr. Myers, and I can see where it dots all the I's and cross all the T's in terms of helping to protect the Met Council from some overzealous person who don't want to see more diverse utilization of procurement activities. The thing that I would like for us, Madam Chair, if this is at all possible, is to take a deep dive into DBE and race consciousness to help us understand the diversification of that community. Meaning, who was underutilized, and if we are going to have a race-conscious approach going forward, who are we looking to try and target to make up for that underutilization, and how we, as a committee, can assist with our various contacts across the community with helping you access those individuals or alerting organizations to put them in. So I go back to DBE being disadvantaged businesses, but then, it's not minority or a protected group. But we need to know who those protected groups are and how is those numbers divided across there for us to ensure that there is equitable participation across those diverse communities. So I don't know if that's something that can be done, or we should invite them back to say, so there were this much underutilization in the African American community, in the indigenous community, the Asian community, and we're going to be looking at trying to address our DBE race conscious efforts by upping the percentage of utilization in those groups. And because we could continue just doing race consciousness on and on and on without really totally benefiting from it. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah, I was gonna say that I know that Hispanic Chamber of Commerce works a lot
Yes.
with small business and helps them, and does mentor with individuals, and so there are other chambers of commerce. And
Absolutely, and I know that has been a focus. I don't want to keep talking about the engagement and outreach, but that is a new unit within the council. The unit's been around for 2 years, but we really have only had the supervisor and the manager, I should say, in that position for under a year. And one of his focuses has been to go to the various chambers. How can you help us build our pool of candidates to get more representation, from the people that you serve and things along those lines. So I know that has been a focus, and we are working to do that. And the race conscious, as you said, that's something we definitely need to build upon, and it's something we're always striving to do, and we want to see an increase in diversity and our money being spent more diverse compared to how it is in the past. And again, how can we best do that? We feel a lot of it is that capacity building to where we can get some of these DBE firms to be bidding as prime and things along those lines. Because when we set race conscious, basically race conscious equates to us putting a goal on a project, right? So when a bidder is proposing, The downside of that, there's nothing, the regulations don't allow for us to say, of this 10% goal, 2% has to go, like it has to be divided amongst the various groups that are classified. So that's the downfall of that, but where we can, as you said, start building that capacity, building the pools to where we can see more, I think DBEs, one, bidding as primes, and then being able to target those
Well,
different groups.
theoretically, a goal is just a minimum.
Correct,
It's not a cap.
correct.
You could, technically, if they came in, had 100% African-American business do all the business in the Met Council.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then your race-conscious effort would be to have all the other race groups come in after that. But that's not how the system look at it, because we operate in a relational-based environment that historically has been that way in Minnesota with shifting demographics. And when you hear, you know, some of the narrative that we're hearing today, we gotta be careful that they don't sue us because we're splitting this up and we can't do that. To me, what I hear is we wanna preserve the relational-based placement of contracts. And what we're trying to do as an equity advisory committee is saying, no, we need to make it all inclusive. And our efforts have to be conscious, not to leave anybody off the table, but maximize the utilization of it. But we get presentations where everybody warns us that there's some proverbial law firm out there hovering over, waiting to pounce on anything that is inclusive. I'd rather go to court defending a public institution right to basically be inclusive with all of the public's money than to sit back afraid of somebody suing because you're going to penetrate that 80% that the white community get of these dollars. Whereas our communities are getting a lot less. So,
But, you know,
go ahead. If we
that just
can
makes me
break it
think-
down.
that just makes me think is that's just thrown out there to stop us from doing it. I mean, it's kind of like, that's been going on for years. There are laws that are made to stop us from doing things. There are words that people use to stop us. There's, you know, these little things that are out there like, oh, don't do that because I'll stop you. And sometimes we take the bait and sometimes we don't. So, you know, with that lawsuit thing,
That's right.
you know, in my mind, I'm just thinking, oh, that's just put there to stop us from doing what we should be doing.
Exactly, but
It
for us to do
reminds
our work, we have to have this broken down a little bit more. We need to look at it. We're not telling you that you have to issue contracts based on that, but it would be important for us to break that DBE down, to kind of look at it from a race standpoint, because that's how we live. That's our reality. There are black business enterprises, there are Asian business enterprises, you know, so we need to know that in order to activate our communities to maximize their participation in the processes that you have. If there's somehow you can come back and help us with that, I just feel real empty. I love the methodology, I think it's legally defensible, but it would be nice to come back and do a deeper dive into that race-conscious piece and DBE piece.
Sure.
So I was just gonna say, what I'm aware of right now, you know, what we all are aware of is that this process is moving through, you know, it has been at the Transportation Committee that these proposed goals have been presented. It will be at the Met Council for adoption at some point soon. I don't have the calendar. But my point is, this conversation is not exclusive, of course,
Right.
to the setting of the goal.
No.
You know, that can move forward. We know that we have goals, we are doing outreach, we are making, and I'm saying this, of course, in the assumption that we'll continue to hear about those outreach efforts that are happening. And I know that's not you.
Right.
You know, that's in another area, but it's important that we link it together.
Absolutely.
So when you hear these comments coming forward, as we're talking about the proposed goal, we're also thinking about the outreach and how we make certain that we're developing that capacity and ensuring that we understand the disaggregated view of who is able to bid and encouraged to bid. So I'm going to suggest that we be real specific, that we hear from outreach about that work that is happening, so that we can also register our thoughts in that regard. As this goal proposal moves forward, I'm also more concerned and will want in the discussion about the goal to talk about the aspect of potentially meeting and exceeding that goal, and so needing to stop. I need to understand that better. Thank you for mentioning it, Dr. Myers. I have lots of questions I haven't asked about that.
Right, and that's something we can look at more too, because I worked for MNDEP previously, historically had not met their goals, so that was never something that was on the table to kind of discuss. Here, we do more than not meet the goal. We have not had anyone from our, FTA representative say to us, okay, we can no longer do these goals, so I don't think it's a finite, the minute you do it, you can't have it. It's a process, and I think that's something that's just never been brought to us, but yes, and that is where we need
that as a probability.
Correct.
And all of this stuff to me is kind of like my insurance company calling me and saying, because you made a claim, we're going to increase your insurance.
Well, and
I'm going to make a claim.
And I think it's one of
Because I worked for it, I paid for it,
Yep.
And that's what our community
Right.
is saying to us. We have to get everything we can out of this and prepare to do better and better and better. So that's, of course, the reason for the question. Even as I support what is clearly a logic-driven and defensible set of goals here. I know, that I expect far more than all of us want, far more, and we have to keep talking about the more that we are doing and getting, what we're seeing come from that effort, what the results of it are. I don't mind looking at the goal, but I do want to talk about the new companies that are bidding and the manner in which we are seeing more capacity in particular disadvantaged communities,
Right.
Whether that be communities of color, disabled, or veterans, or whatever. But to be able to look at those specific communities.
Break it out.
Again, that isn't all you. We hear those presentations coming out of another area as well. But we're always making the connections, and I appreciate that all of us are aware of the many connections that exist.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that comment, and I think any resources that you're able to put in our direction, whether it be to myself, Antonio, who's the manager for that outreach unit, we are always open to any type of outreach you'd like us to do, connections you can put us in touch with that could help us expand those pools for the programs. That's something we're always on board with, always wanting to do. So we as much as we would like to ask you, also bring that to us. Let us know, because the people that are out in these communities are able to better educate us on where we can find, more firms that we can do that. What does each community need for us to help them build that capacity? So I think we really want to know that information, so please provide that to us.
Yeah, but so that you understand, the Black Chamber of Commerce is not the St. Paul Chamber of Commerce.
Right.
And it doesn't have that 70-year, 80-year history and the robust membership that the St. Paul Chamber has, or the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. They're fledgling. I remember Wilkins City, St. Paul, giving them the first operational capital to help them kind of get started. Hispanic, Indigenous, Richard A. Bell, I think his name was, and from the Indigenous Chamber. But if a contract was put out by the Met Council to pay them to help with nurturing more of their business members and others, or nurturing more capacity to bid on contracts, then I think you find a willing group. And I think you talked about it more, but maybe there is some federal dollars or other dollars that can be offered up to all of those communities. I mean, as diverse as it get, to say, we need more folks from your community bidding on projects, build capacity there for us. It'd also be nice if our legal counsel would look at these matters from the standpoint of furthering equal opportunity versus, you know, the way we're looking at things right now is that we don't want to get, you know, too much utilization. But what would it look like from a legal standpoint to say, we're willing to defend the Met Council right to further equal opportunity across every community, and we're willing to go to court to do that. Once we get to that point, then we know that we're really dealing with an equitable system that have transitioned itself from a relational-based approach that is the norm and culture in a lot of places, not just the Met Council, but in a lot of places. So we're hoping to get there. That's kind of where we want to. But I think the first step, though, Madam Chair, is to have them come back and break down that DBE into the race groups that occupy that acronym, and race conscious, and who were in those race groups underutilized. I think we need to disclose that. Let us see what that looks like.
Yeah, I think we can definitely bring that back and.
That's in the technical report, so if you take me back, then I can present the
Perfect.
breakdown.
Here we go.
Perfect.
I do want to address this question about litigation. I've done analysis of what generates litigation around the country. There are very few racial and ethnic minority groups that bring lawsuits against state and local governments because they want the contract. And so litigation is kind of like counterproductive. The people who are bringing litigation against race-conscious programs aren't really the business enterprises. They're mostly very well funded institutes. But they're amazing, incredibly well-funded, resourced institutes. It's not about the individual complaint, rather it's about dismantling the whole system. And so I'm going to address your question about
I know who they are.
being conservative.
Yeah.
One of the purposes of being conservative is to make sure that this doesn't become kind of like a lightning rod for the dismantling, not just of Metropolitan Council, but Minnesota Public Transportation, the whole thing,
Yeah.
the whole country.
Yeah.
No, I
So
understand that.
there are two things that are going on here. One is that we have groups within the disadvantaged business enterprise community that haven't organized to engage in lawsuits. Okay, for self-interest. I mean, they prefer to get a contract than to win a case. And the second is that we don't really want Metropolitan Council to spend all this time trying to defend the program, rather want them to spend their time, expanding the pool, making opportunities available. But if you invite me back, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about a real issue in Minnesota. And that's by lumping all groups together, one or two groups come out of town.
Yeah. Yeah.
And herein lies a role for this committee. The
Yeah.
Equity Committee can ask and answer the question, are you doing your job as an Equity Committee by lumping everybody together, wherein one group comes out of top? Then it's almost 8 o'clock and I do that. But I want to come back, if you invite me, to share some of the data on the irony of having a program that doesn't benefit everybody.
Right. Yeah, that would be great for us.
Yeah.
It
Yes.
helps us.
And then also, from as you requested the information, when looking at specific to our projects, where are we seeing still those disparities? And you said you had that data in the appendices, so I think that we can definitely have you back to present on that.
Last thing is, I'm always a proponent of audits of the administrative application of the provisions in the equal opportunity laws that facilitate equal access and opportunity. And because theoretically, if you are administratively compliant with those, you don't have to worry about race-conscious approach because you're meeting the mark. In theory, that is, not necessarily. And I'm not proposing it at this point, but I do get it. And I know the big boys that are out there, but if you match that, the administrative application of those laws, against who is winning out on the contracts, you could assume that the system is purposely not complying with the laws in order to get a greater benefit to those that don't necessarily fall under the law. Now that becomes a whole quid pro quo kind of relationship, and that is completely illegal. But that's for another time, another place, and some of us just think along those lines. We're just trying to make sure that everything is fair and equitable, and that's what we've been charged in this committee with doing. And I think the first step in that is to do a deep dive into that data.
Sure. I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you for an amazing presentation. We appreciate that and certainly welcome you to come back.
Thank you.
Quickly, before we go, are there any reports from the standing committees? Management, transportation?
You know, I can just say that we've had some robust discussions at the Metropolitan Council on transportation lately, as we have been entertaining blue line extension, green line extension, and funding around gaps that exist for the green line extension, and just making certain that the blue line moves forward. We continue to talk in community development. Last night, we had a meeting last night, didn't we? Last night, we spoke about housing and our work as a Metropolitan Council in ensuring affordable housing for those most in need in our community. We continue to debate moving forward our annual plan for the HRA, and that is coming up. I think there's a public hearing coming up on that. And that's all I can think of right now. And it's late, so you won't talk anymore either.
Thank you so much. Are there any announcements? Okay, that concludes our agenda for tonight. Seeing no comments or further comments, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I just have to say your hair is busted. I mean, it is like.
Busted. Ooh.
That's a good
That's a
thing.
good one, yeah. It's a good thing.
It's nice. I mean, it's, man.
I know, it is.
Madam Chair, I'm just paying a compliment.
It's
Madam
off the
Chair.
record. Thank you, sir.
All right, y'all, thank y'all for that.
Learned a new term.
Thank you so much.